How would a person feel if they changed every day? Sometimes a boy, sometimes a girl, sometimes an adult, and sometimes a child. The main character of the movie is a boy named Gene, but he doesn't have just one face. He is always changing. He tells us his story. Every time he wakes up, he is a new person. Sometimes he is old, sometimes young, sometimes a girl, and sometimes a boy. His whole body and identity change. He even becomes a foreigner. His voice and how he sees things change too. His body parts fit the age of the person he becomes. That's why he has different glasses for different eyesight, shoes in many sizes, and clothes for both boys and girls. Jin then shares that he is a furniture designer. He makes the furniture with his own hands and builds it himself. He has gotten used to the changes he goes through every day. Because Jin didn't know how to return to his normal self, he did all his work online. This way, he didn't have to show himself in person. Only two people knew his secret, his mother and his friend, Sang. We are then introduced to Sang, who used to help Jin with furniture work. Besides furniture designing, Sang worked as a customer service representative for other things. One day, Sang visits Jin and tells him that he looks very handsome today. He suggests they go out for a walk. They go to a club and have a great time. Gene spends the night with a girl, but when he wakes up, he realizes he has turned into an old man. He has recorded videos of all his different faces on his laptop. Gene explains that when he becomes a foreigner, he can't speak his national language anymore. Instead, he speaks the native language of the country he looks like, such as Chinese or Japanese, even though he never learned those languages. Because of his constantly changing identity, he never felt connected to anyone and never fell in love. His body transformation started about 12 years ago when he was 18 years old. Then a moment from Jin's past is shown. One day, he wakes up, looks in the mirror, and sees that he has turned into a strange man. He feels very scared. Jin tells his mother everything, and she is shocked, but she manages to stay calm and says sorry to him. Jin could not live a normal life like other people. Because of his condition, he had to drop out of school. While other kids his age were attending school, he was struggling to keep his life balanced. Sang brings some things to Jin's house, and a middle-aged woman opens the door and offers him food. Sang thinks this woman might be Jin's real mother. But then Jin's actual mother arrives, and Sang realizes the woman who opened the door is Jin himself. Sang is shocked and can't believe what is happening. To confirm this, Sang asks the woman questions only Jin would know. She answers all of them correctly. Sang is even more surprised and starts laughing at the situation. After this, Sang starts visiting Jin daily, and every day Jin has a new appearance. They talk and laugh together. One day, when Jin becomes a girl, they go to the club. Sang tells him, "We've been friends for 15 years, and today you're a girl. So, could you be close to me in this body?" Hearing this, Jin gives a different response. He says, "Control yourself." The next day, Jin and Sang meet again, and this time Jin is a boy. Sang tells him that the owner of the company he works for is stealing Jin's furniture designs. An idea comes to them. They decide to start their own company and name it ALX. They agree that Jin will focus on designing furniture, and Sang will handle hiring people and selling the products. At first, Jin is just a furniture maker, but soon he becomes a supplier too. Jin visits a furniture shop and notices something interesting. While he's looking around, a girl named Sue, who works at the shop, watches him. She asks him, "What are you looking for?" Jin replies, "I need a chair that makes me feel like I'm sitting on a horse." Hearing this, Sue shows him a company called ALX and says, "You'll find the best furniture here." Jin realizes she is recommending his own website. He jokingly asks her, "Is it okay to praise someone else's products and advertise for free?" Sue laughs at this. Jin starts visiting the shop every day just to see Sue, but because of his changing appearance, Sue never realizes that he is Jin as time passes. Jin starts to develop feelings for Sue and eventually falls in love with her. Jan has collected many visiting cards from Sue's shop, going there every day as a different customer due to his changing appearance. One day, when Jin becomes a very handsome boy, he visits Sue's shop again. This time, he gathers the courage to ask her out for dinner. First, Sue refuses his offer. Jin then tells her that he has practiced a lot just to ask her this question. Seeing his sincerity, she changes her mind and agrees to go out with him. Jin buys food and takes Sue to his furniture-making place, but she hesitates and refuses to go. To assure her, Jin gives her his secretary's number and says, "I'm not a bad person, but if you feel uncomfortable, you can file a complaint." Sue finally agrees, and when they arrive, she realizes it's the ALX factory. The workers there truly admired ALX furniture. They have dinner together, and afterward, Jin drops Sue off at her house. They make plans to meet again the next day. However, Jin faces a problem. If he falls asleep, he will change into someone else. To prevent this, he sets an alarm to wake him up every hour, trying to stay awake and busy so time passes without without him sleeping. The next day, they meet again and have a great time. Sue asks Jean about his job at ALX, and he tells her he is a furniture designer. While they are talking, Sang arrives unexpectedly, so Jean and Sue quickly hide. After a while, Sue and Sang go home, and Jean stays behind, working and trying to keep himself awake. The pattern repeats, and the next day they meet again. But now we see that Jean has not slept for days, exhausted from trying to stay the same person for Sue. The next night, as Jean is on the bus to drop Sue off, he falls asleep due to exhaustion. When the bus arrives at the station, he wakes up and realizes he is transformed into a middle-aged man. At the station, he sees Sue waiting for him, but he can't approach her. The handsome boy she had gotten to know had now become an old man, and he knew Sue would be shocked to see him like that. While he is struggling with what to do, Sue gets a call from her boss and leaves. She tries calling Jean several times, but he doesn't answer and instead sends her a message saying sorry. At this moment, Jean feels that his chances at a beautiful life with Sue have come to an end. Soon, Sue replies, saying, "Where are you? I waited for you at the bus stop." Determined not to hide anymore, Jean decides that he will tell her everything, no matter what. The next day, when Jean turns into a girl, he asks Sue to come with him, planning to reveal the whole truth about his condition. Sue says she already knows everything about Jean and takes him to the furniture factory. There, Jean shows her all the videos of his different faces, explaining that he is actually a boy whose gender changes every time he wakes up. He tells her that the person she has been spending time with for the past days is indeed Jean. Despite his explanation, Sue finds it hard to believe and leaves. Even after many days, Sue can't forget Jean. She keeps thinking about him and eventually decides to visit him at his factory. By then, Jean has transformed into a Japanese woman. He invites Sue inside. Sue asks Jean, "Do you really have feelings for me? If so, then you need to agree to my request. I want to sleep with you and see you change with my own eyes." Jean agrees, and while they are together, Sue asks him how long this has been happening. Jean then shares his entire story with her, explaining everything about his condition and how he has been living with these constant changes. Sue discovers that Jin's real age is 29, the same as hers. She asks him why he chose her. Jin explains that although he had accepted his condition, he couldn't help but fall for her when he saw her. They both fall asleep together. When they wake up the next morning, Jin has transformed back into a handsome boy. He's happy that Sue is still with him despite knowing everything. They continue to spend time together and live a happy life. Sue even gets a tattoo on Jin's neck to help identify him. One day, Jin needs to attend a party with Sue, but turns into an old woman instead. Despite his efforts, he can't avoid falling asleep. At the party, Sue is left alone while others inquire about her partner. They want to know where Jean is, especially since Sue had been seen with different people before. At the party, a guy grabs Sue's hand in a way Jean had described so she would recognize him. Everyone, including Sue's boss, is surprised to see Jean in this form. The next day, Jean becomes a girl and takes Sue to meet his mother. Jin's mother thanks Sue for being with her son. Jean starts to wonder if Sue would agree to marry him and decides to make a wedding ring. He spends many days crafting it carefully. The following day, Sue talks to a doctor about Jin's condition and his transformations. The doctor suggests medication for tension and depression to help Sue cope. Now back to being a handsome boy, Jean hears Sue say, "I enjoy every moment with you," and he feels that he doesn't want this time to end. Jean tells Sue that he wants her to be with him as a normal person and asks if she will marry him. Sue doesn't answer immediately. As he's about to drop her off at home, he asks again, "Will you marry me?" Sue asks him to stop the car. She says that marriage is a serious commitment and questions how she would explain to her family that her partner is someone who changes every day. Jean responds that he feels unwell when he is away from her. Sue tells him that he is only thinking about himself. She points out that his identity is constantly changing. His face today is different from tomorrow's, making it hard for anyone, including her, to recognize him. She expresses how difficult it is for her to see Jean in all his changing forms and how challenging it would be to explain this to others. Jean understands her concerns. Sue gets back in the car and takes her tension relief pills. Later, Sue is admitted to the hospital, and Jean comes to be with her. Jan learns that Sue has been taking high doses of depression pills, which have made her sick. After overhearing a conversation between Sue and her doctor, he realizes her condition is due to him. The next day, when Jean becomes a girl again, he talks to his mother. She reveals that he has the same condition as his father, who also changed appearances and left to avoid causing stress to his wife. Jean decides to follow his father's example and do the same. In the evening, Jean and Sue meet for a walk. Jean tells her that they should break up and leaves. Before parting, he gives Sue a chair, which makes her cry as she remembers him 10 months later. Sue is feeling better. One day, her boss shows her a website featuring furniture designs. Sue realizes that the designs are Jin's. Her boss praises the designs and suggests they order them. Sue realizes that she was more concerned with what others would think than with her own feelings. Recognizing that she can't live without Jean, she decides to find him. Jean is now living in the Czech Republic, working as a designer and speaking their language. Meanwhile, Sue, having tracked down Jin's address, arrives there. When Sue arrives, Jin tells her that there is no boy named Jean here. Sue explains that she came from a studio in Korea, a major furniture market, and pleads with him to let her in. Once inside, Sue sees shoes, clothes, and furniture similar to what Jean had made. Sue tells Jean, "My company loves your designs, so I wanted to see you." Jean responds, "Stop it. I've changed completely. I want to be with you." Jean warns Sue that being with him might make her sick again. Sue replies, "Living this way is worse than any disease." She apologizes to Jean, and they decide to go for a walk together. During their walk, Sue admits that seeing him change scared her, and she struggled to explain her feelings. She tells Jean that she can't live without him and asks him to marry her. Jean gives her the same ring he had crafted before, and they both find happiness together, bringing the story to a joyful ending.